Hey everyone, and welcome to another video, and today we're going to be talking about what type of player are you. Now, I believe League is 70% surfing and 30% chess. Now, this is the weirdest analogy in the world, I know, I understand that, but what I basically mean is that 70% of the game is done via feel, right? Feel, instincts, intuition, muscle memory, etc. And 30% of it is done via logical thoughts, analytical thoughts, using the lull states, etc. Now, to get a little bit deeper here, these are examples of areas in the game on the left-hand side that I believe are largely feel. Threat assessment, damage output and input, micro execution, range assessment, awareness of your surroundings. Now, sure, you can think your way through a few parts of these, but when push comes to shove and it's a very, fast-paced, chaotic moment of the game, you're going to default to your muscle memory. You're going to default to your habits. You're going to default to how you feel about these particular things. Now, on the right-hand side, we have moments of the game where you need to be very logical and very analytical in your approach. Things like win con assessment, lull state usage, lane assignments, playing around objectives, pre-team fight assessment. These are things that you really need to think very carefully about in those lull states to really plan your next move. Now, there are concepts down on the bottom right that I believe can be double dipped. You can approach it from a logical angle or from a very intuitive feel angle. Things like wave states. Now, I'll give you an analogy for this one. So let's say there is an Echo player that has never reviewed a game for 4 years. He's an Echo one trick. He's played thousands of games of Echo. And I asked him, we look at a VOD with him for the first time, and I said, hey man, why do you like does the wave feel good or bad here? Like, why are you playing the waves like this? And he's like, he'll probably say something like, oh, it just feels good. I mean, I just like it. I don't really know why, but it just feels really good. Now, on the flip side, you can get someone that reviews every single game and is a very analytical type player, and you can actually step through why they like the wave in that particular location. Well, it's like, okay, given I'm under a lot of threat from the jungler, my champion likes long lane states, etc., 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 I kind of like holding the wave in these locations, and this is exactly why. You can actually approach these concepts very similarly from two differing angles. It's depending on the personality and the type of player you are. Now, this percentage, this 70-30 percentage is something I really want you to keep in your mind as we go through the entirety of this video. So, I'm going to walk through an analogy that really describes what I mean here, so we go a little bit deeper. So, I went bowling, I think it was about 1 or 2 months ago with a few friends, and I hadn't done bowling since I was a young kid, and I'm walking up to the alley and there's a bunch of balls there, and I said to myself, interesting, what would be the best weight to use in order to get the highest score? I mean, do I want a heavy ball? Like, what do all these numbers mean? Do I want a heavy ball so I can get more power? Or do I want a lighter one so I can actually swing it faster? Do I want a small hole size so I can grip it tighter? Or do I want more of bigger holes so I can let go easier when I'm actually releasing the ball? What stance should I use? Where should I put in my feet? Like, my approach to learning that skill or just executing that skill, I was quite analytical. I mean, I would say I was actually kind of 80% analytical and 20% intuitive. Now, there was an element of intuition because after I threw that ball, I would kind of listen and observe and listen to my instincts. Did that feel right? Or did that feel really awkward? And then I'll maybe adjust and pick up another ball. Whereas my friend was like, who cares? This one's a pretty color. I'm going to pick that one up. I'm going to send it. And then if it feels right, it feels right. And, they're probably a lot slower to adapt because they don't really care as much. And yes, you could say that he probably just didn't care about getting a high score and he just wanted to have some fun. But it really got me thinking. There's people that have a very intuitive approach to learning and other people that have a very analytical approach to learning. And I've seen this across, all of my clients and all the coaching that I do. I've seen this in League a lot. So when I'm coming into coaching, my step number one a lot of the time is figuring out what sort of player is this? What sort of player am I working with? Am I working with a highly intuitive type player or a very analytical type player? So most people fall somewhere on this spectrum, all the way from highly logical and analytical, all the way through to highly intuitive. And obviously personality comes into play here, and that's something that we need to consider. So for me, I would say I'm somewhere up here. I would say I'm maybe 70% over here logical, probably too logical in my approach, honestly, comparatively to some other players. Now, what would the ideal mixture look like? Now, I've done a lot of study and done a lot of research, gone into the literature, and they can't conclusively prove which one takes precedence over the other. but because it really depends on the complexity of the problem. But for League, in my hunch, I believe that you definitely want to be leaning on the right-hand side. You definitely want to be at least, like I said, 70% of the time approaching most things with an element of intuition. And this is because most of the elements of the game are done via muscle memory and feel. Like, you can't think your way through every single point of the game, because when you're in the heat of battle and you're laning against someone, or you're in a skirmish, or there's all these things happening, you can't rely on logical thought because you don't have time to take a step back. You just got to execute. This is due to the speed of the game, the lack of time to think, as well as the overly complex nature of the problems. This is something that we'll dwell on a lot throughout this video. So I actually wanted to take a step back and explain how I visualize learning and tie it back to the intuitive and analytical approaches. So at the top here, let's say this is all of the potential learning from a given experience. So you exit out a game, and let's say all of the water in this bucket here, so this is a bucket, represents all of the potential learning that you could possibly have from that game. So I believe all the learning goes into 3 buckets here. On the left-hand side, this is learning that is basically forgotten, lost forever, right? It's just wasted essentially, okay? This is because maybe we don't review, we don't care enough, whatever. It's just gone. The middle one here, this is stuff that is actively learned by keeping it in your short-term memory long enough for you to really thoroughly understand it. So let's say there's like maybe there's like a particular skirmish, right? And you actually really got into the review and you said to yourself, okay, this is exactly why this happened. I was late to the fight. I couldn't control the choke points. I let them in that angle, and then we lost the fight because of that. You really go deep and you really dwell on it. Well, the longer you dwell on it and the longer it stays in your short-term memory and the more you understand it to a deep level, chances are it's going to seep through into your long-term memory, and it's going to sit there, I'm not going to say forever, but for a very long time, as long as you revisit it every now and then. And then we actually have on the right-hand side, stuff that is learnt via muscle memory or through the intensity of the experience, generally via emotions and feel. Things that are burnt in a way, or singed into the long-term memory. And this is actually why my theory is that people that are highly emotional about the game, and this is, I would say, the current breed of pro players, especially when their egos are involved in that sort of thing, when they die, they experience an immense amount of pain. And they're able to singe or burn things into their muscle memory and feel things to a very deep degree in which they never want to forget it. I remember specifically working with pro players in Dire Wars where some of them, if they make a mistake, they would beat themselves up so badly because they can't fathom in their mind that they would make that mistake again. So they learn via the intensity of the experience, very feel-oriented. Now, yes, ideally you combine it with an understanding of what actually happened, but they don't really have to understand why it happened for you to learn, especially a lot of these feel-oriented concepts of the game, like damage output, skirmishing, threat assessment, and things like that. So again, this is, it is a very high-level concept, but it is something that I think will hopefully add a little bit of detail and understanding throughout this video. So what actually tends to characterize an intuitive player in my experience coaching? Well, they tend to gravitate toward these more micro-intensive skill-expressive champions, like the ones on the right-hand side. I would say they learn and alter their behavior via feel, generally manifesting in a bulk amount of games played. They're generally able to identify positive and negative events in the game, and usually draw back on a lot of previous experiences. A lot of these intuitive players are grinders. Like, they played a lot of games, so they tend to like to play a lot of games because that's how they feel comfortable learning. They want to draw back on previous experiences and then use that to create a reference point moving forward. Now, we've got to be careful here because sometimes, you can conflate someone who genuinely likes to learn in an intuitive manner via comparatively to straight addiction, right? There's people that are straight addicted to the game. It's not because they prefer learning this way. They're just addicted to the game of League of Legends. That's something we need to keep in mind here. The third one, they're able to enter the flow state generally way easier than other players, and they're able to be much more present in the game itself, generally characterized by higher immediate average low dodge game scores, something to keep in mind. They tend to know what feels right, sometimes without even knowing why it works. They'll know, it's like tying back to that Echo example. They might know kind of what they want to do in the lane with the wave states and the trades, but they won't be able to tell you why that is the case. That's a very, very common thing with intuitive players. They tend to learn more from montages and highlights than traditional educational content. They tend to under-review more than over-review, leading to missed opportunities and completely misunderstanding a lot of macro concepts. But as a side note, this is very important to note, due to the social conventions around League, we tend to favor and push the narrative of intuitive approaches to learning, right? When you load it, so you go into Twitch TV, right? You look at any of the best players or the most popular content creators or streamers. It's not like they talk about their learning process, right? It's not like they really get into the details and like step you through specifically how they improve as a player. It's generally, I mean, they're not bothered explaining that, or they might not even have one. So for people who are newer to the game and want to aspire to be these high ranks or be like these players, they're not going to think about creating a process, even if they're not an intuitive type player. It's not going to resonate with them, but they're going to blindly follow it anyway. So most people end up being confused as to what actually works best for them. And this is a whole different discussion that probably for the podcast that I do. But yeah, I think the social conventions surrounding around League of Legends and improving in League of Legends definitely hinders a lot of people improvement, because no, not everyone likes to improve in an intuitive type way. This is not how they like to approach improving in general in any challenging task. So what tends to characterize an analytical player in my experience? So generally, not always, they tend to gravitate towards more range strategic oriented champions like the ones on the left hand side that have more of a set trading pattern or defined reference points. So they know exactly what they need to be doing and why. And this is actually why, by the way, they tend to not feel comfortable trading HP for HP. So they hate the idea of, say, like, you know, those matchups where it's like a Kali versus Aurelia, right? Very heavy trading. You're going to always trade HP for HP. And a lot of the time it is just like, you know, whoever plays the trades better and whoever outplays the other one. If the Akali uses E reactively to the Aurelia E and avoids that, you know, it can work out well, etc. There's a lot of these matchups that are very mechanically oriented. They tend to avoid these sorts of ones. They want to know, like they want to be that mouse. Okay, I want to get to my level 6 and then I could use my R. Or I'm a TF and I want to get to my 6 and I could use my R. Or I'm a Lux and I can just, if I just get to my Lunans, I can take over the game. Or it's a Zillion, I just need to scale and press my R and my 80 carry and I'm all good. They really like a very set trading pattern and set reference point and role in the game. They tend to think more about why something is happening and want to understand why things work the way they do, generally resulting in a deep understanding of the theory behind the concepts. They generally overemphasize macro and communication comparatively to laning and micro. They're more prone to overcomplicating situations due to needing to get to the bottom of given situations, right? Like, because they really lack that feel, they're just more prone to overthinking and overcomplicating and over-reviewing. They actually are more prone to hardcore mental blocks as well due to the advanced narratives that they can have in their head, but not always. Like I said, they tend to over-review, and they find it hard to connect with feelings and emotions in the game itself. And what I mean by that is, like, say you die to a gank. Some players will register the death of that gank in a very painful, personal way. It's like, okay, I know now what Hecarim can do to me because that was really painful and I really don't want to die to that again. And I know how much damage that Hecarim did. So intuitively, I'll know how to adjust next time. Other players won't really connect that death with like an emotion or a feeling. They'll just want to like understand why the death occurred and what part that Hecarim did and why they were able to die at a really like from a logical perspective. They won't connect that with an emotion or a feel to the game, if that makes sense. For those of you who've kind of been on both sides, you'll know exactly what I mean. It is quite hard to really resonate with if you are an analytical player. So a common question is, how do you become more feel-oriented? Well, I would say actively coming into the game with the intention to express what you know is very, very important. Like, don't worry about anything else in the loading screen outside of just how do you win your lane and how do you win your mid-jungle 2v2. That's it. No thinking should really be done once the minions are spawned. All of the thinking opportunity is done before that. You can think in the loading screen, whatever, but when those minions are spawned and you're in that lane itself, no think, just feel. Just express what you currently know. Let your muscle memory and your intuition express itself. I would say the LoL dodge game is a really good way to become more feel-oriented. I would check out my LoL dodge game video if you haven't already on my channel. In reviews, focus only on the first 8 minutes. Observe, observe, observe. Keep it really, really simple. I would say tie every single review point back to what felt wrong or right. So I talk a lot about reverse engineering via feel. So if something felt wrong in the lane or felt right, go to that moment. It might be a trade that you did really well, or a gank that felt really bad, or a wave state that felt really good, or a wave state that felt really bad. Just go to that moment, observe it, register the pain or register the positive experience, move on. Throw all the win rate, MMR crap, all of it out the window. Don't worry about that for now. I would urge you to play around with a feel-oriented champion like the ones mentioned in the previous slides, or if you're a big-time mage player and you don't enjoy any of those melee-type champions, play more of a crossover type champ, like a Cassio, like an Ahri, a Sylas, Rumble, Zoe, Vex. These champions that aren't like traditional control mages, but have a little bit more agency and are a little bit more chaotic and feel-oriented. Don't come into games with any learning objectives at all. Just play the game and execute. Now, I want to quickly explain something here that I think is very important for people who want to become more feel-oriented, and it's something that I call the execution and learning phases. Okay, so let's back up here a little bit. So, in League, a common thing you hear from a lot of coaches and I would say educational content creators, we talk about like setting learning objectives and focusing on specific areas. What I believe, and this is something that I've actually come across recently, and I did talk about this on the recent Broken by Concept episode, is that let's say you realize that the coach told you really need to focus on your mid-game team fighting or whatever it is, or mid-game positioning, or maybe mid-game farming, or whatever it might be, some specific element of your gameplay, right? And you focus on it. Maybe you focus on it for like 3 weeks. It becomes a massive part of your review process, and even in the game itself, you're directing a lot of your mental stack energy towards this specific skill. So incrementally, over these next 2 to 3 weeks, you begin to develop muscle memory in this given skill, right? And it becomes a habit, and it becomes ingrained in your level of play, and you really understand it, and you're able to execute it well. In the process of focusing on this mid-game positioning, or playing in accordance to your teammate's location, or picking up side lane farm, or whatever it might be, what's the first thing that's going to go down in skill when you focus on this? What's the first thing that's going to go? Well, the first thing that's going to go is your entire early lane fundamentals. Your first 8 minutes are inevitably going to go to shit. Like the basics of lane, like your first clear jungle tracking is going to go to shit. Your warding and your leaning is going to go to shit. Your pre first base trading is going to go to shit. Your wave management is going to go to shit. All of your first 8-minute fundamentals are the first thing that's going to go down. Now, what happens if your fundamentals in the first 8 minutes go down? Well, inevitably, you're going to start to play worse, because it doesn't matter how good your mid-game is. If your first 8 minutes aren't incredibly consistent, you're going to struggle anyway. It doesn't matter how good you are in the mid-game. So what most people, what happens, right? They go from learning objective, working on this mid-game, and they remember back to that coaching session and said, oh yeah, the coach also said I should focus on this. So they go from learning objective straight to another learning objective, straight to another learning objective. But what they failed to realize is that each time they focus on a learning objective, their fundamentals and their first 8 minutes is going to shit every single time. So what I actually recommend for most people is that they focus on a learning objective. Then what you should actually do, and this is call this the learning phase, where you're actually learning a new concept. What you should actually do is for the next 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, simply execute what you currently know and go back to the fundamentals of the first 8 minutes. Don't learn anything new. Just revisit the things that you've learned before and focus on tightening up your first 8 minutes and just do the basics. Execute what you know. So the great thing about this is that if you just simply execute what you know and revisit the things that you've previously visited, and then you implement this new learning that you've had, a lot of the time you're going to now know where this new learning gets you in terms of LP. You're going to see where it gets you. So you're going to, obviously implement your new learning, because this is now a habit, tighten up the fundamentals that you've now neglected for a while. Now, once you've done that and you've plateaued again, right? So you've plateaued again because you've done this, you've gone back to your fundamentals, you implemented your new learning, you're comfortable again. Great. Then and only then do you focus on specifically focus on a new learning objective. So this is what I call, we have the learning phase, and then we have the execution phase. Now, this should last, 2 to 3 weeks, and then this phase should last again 2 to 3 weeks as well. Learning phase, execution phase. Learning phase, execution phase. That way, you become a more well-rounded player. You don't mental boom because your confidence isn't going to go to shit this way, and you're going to be able to get a more clear look of how good you actually are. That's something that's very, very important for you. And for most people who are more feel-oriented, I would stay in the execution phase for an extended period of time. Like, I would actually be in the execution phase for a lot longer. That's what I mean by that. Something to keep in mind. And if you do want to become more field-oriented, I would actually watch a lot of montages and highlights of your champions to see how other people interpret skirmishes and things like that. Also very important. So how to become more analytically oriented. Nice little picture of T1. Go hard on your lull state usage in order to get better at calibrating. So what do I mean by calibrating? So essentially calibrating is, pressing tab, looking at all the information in front of you and saying, okay, who's winning? Who's losing? What's the next objective? When am I strong? Where are my teammates? What are they doing? What's actually happening in the map? Who's weak? Who's strong? If you do this, and you can actually just take a holistic look at what the hell's going on in the game, you're going to start to have a lot more of an accurate hypothesis moving forward. Your decision making is going to be factoring in more information. So you're going to start to think more, clearly about what's actually going into the game. Rather than going through straight feel, you're going to have a bit of basis to your decision making. That would be my sole focus, actually, if I wanted to become more analytically oriented. I would spend time in my reviews actually breaking down things, why they happen. So go to an emotional event in the VOD. Like I said before, go to an emotional event, whether it's a lost skirmish, whether it's a death to a gank, a negative trait, whatever it might be. Observe it. Question and probe what the hell happened here and why did it happen, and really understand it. Don't just look at it and be like, oh, okay, yep, I died to the Hecarim and move on. No. Why did you die to the Hecarim? What would you have done next time if you were in this situation? What could I have done to avoid this? What were the signs in the game that would tell me that I'm probably under threat here? These are all very important questions to ask yourself. Dabble with champions that have a clear defined reference point and tend to slow down the early lane. For example, Veigar, right? Veigar's a really great example. It's like, well, you can play off your Predator cooldown, you can play off your ult cooldown. You don't need to feel rushed to kind of do things because you scale well into mid game, or even crossover champions like Silas that aren't pure chaos. They do need levels and they do need items. Just slow it down a little bit. Rather than playing these champions like Aurelia that are go, or Yasuo or something like that, try and find a crossover champ or a champ that really forces you to have a defined reference point. You will find it very difficult at the start to alternate between thinking in the lull states and just simply expressing your best self because you're so used to playing intuitively. So that's completely normal. So ideally, the goal at the end of the day is to blindly trust our intuition and muscle memory in lane and then use the lull states to think. But that is our long-term goal. And the other note is you will play worse at the beginning because your mental stack is going to be filled with so much stuff. It's going to be filled to the brim. It's just going to result naturally in worse mechanical performances. That's just part of the process. There's nothing you can do to avoid that. So what I want to do, guys, is show you an example of how you can break down a death in the lane, both from an analytical and from an intuitive type perspective. So let's start this as if I was a very highly analytical type player and I really wanted to improve my intuition and feel for the game. What would I recommend? So what would I do? I'll go to this death and I'll just observe. And just be like, what happened? Why did I die here? Oh, okay, Echo, W behind me. He came from out of vision, so I didn't actually hear the W actually get casted. I thought I was safe enough because I was close to my tower, but I ended up getting chased down and died. And, maybe I could have outplayed this if I flashed towards my tower a little bit more. Things like that. I just basically observe, register the painful experience, make a mental note of how much damage Echo actually does this early on. And that's about it. I wouldn't overcomplicate it. I don't really want to go even deep on why it happened. I mean, maybe I'll make a mental note. I'm like, oh, okay, they did 3-cam bot side and looped around here and ganked me, which, all right, now I know it's possible. But I wouldn't really overcomplicate it. I'm just observing, really, in a very non-judgmental way. If you do this over and over and over again, you'll start to see trends and you'll start to develop a feel for the game based off your past experiences. Now, this is very important for over-analytical people who tend to overcomplicate things because you need to connect your understanding of the game with how it feels like to play. Now, let's say I was a very intuitive player and I wanted to be more analytical. So what I would do, rather than just kind of going, oh, yeah, goddamn Echo, jungle diff, 3-cam me, whatever, let's just move on. Rather than doing that, what I would probably say is, okay, observe it, and ask yourself, and just be honest with yourself. Well, first of all, did I know Echo could do 3-cam? Did I even know where he started? Was I aware that, do I really understand how jungle pathing works? Was I even thinking about my volatility in this lane? Was I even aware of how heavy trading we were? Like, I'll start to be honest with myself. Why did this gank actually happen? Well, I'm assuming Echo saw that we're in a heavy trading lane and probably saw that my wave was bouncing out. He probably also knew that I wouldn't expect a 3-cam bot side, so putting 2 and 2 together, it makes a lot of sense. So basically my goal here is to understand the why. Put myself in Echo's shoes and really understand why this gank was so successful from Echo, why this death actually occurred, and understand the variables I didn't consider. Was it because I didn't know he started bot? Was it because I didn't know he could do 3-cam bot side? Was it because I didn't think I could die overall? Was it because I knew where he was, but I thought that if I was this close to my tower, I'm all good? Just understand what is it that you didn't consider. And then you can come to a conclusion of what you needed to do next time. Okay, now that I know Echo can do 3-cam bot side, I would probably either preemptively ward that side, or I'd be leaning on the other side and getting a ward top, or I maybe call my jungler to help me get the wave out, knowing that we're heavy trading. Something like that. So just going a little bit deeper and understanding the why behind it. Now, all I would do if I were trying to become a little bit more analytical is go to 2 or 3, maybe even 4 pivotal moments of the game, whether it's a major death, a major skirmish, that's about it, and understand the why. Putting yourself in the shoes of the enemy and understand the variables specifically that you did not or did consider. So what was the real point of this video? Well, I just wanted to encourage introspection in the community so that intuitive type players can experiment with being a little bit more analytical and vice versa. There's going to be a lot of players out there like this guy on the right hand side that can just chill, muscle memory, feel, and play to a high level and understand things. Then we have players that are hyper analytical and love to understand the theory of why, and might get pretty far up but then struggle when really put in tough situations or in skirmishes or in landing and things like that. So ideally, we get both sorts of players, experiment with being getting outside their comfort zone and understanding why their strengths are their strengths or why their weaknesses are their weaknesses. Just to, I just want you guys to all be a little bit more introspective. That's about it. So look, if you have any questions, let me know. It's a bit of a complex video, and I don't like doing these videos that much anymore because I try to be as pragmatic as possible. But this is something that I have noticed as a real trend in my mid lane academy, and something I found interesting. So let me know what you think, guys. Otherwise, have a great one. Cheers.